My name is Yichin, and I woke up to stone walls covered in markings that glowed faint blue in the darkness. My head throbbed as fragmented memories crashed through my mind. A life before this one. Faces I should know, skills I shouldn't possess. A translucent screen materialized in front of my eyes, displaying a single line. Welcome, Master. Begin your path by finding worthy disciples. I pushed myself up from the cold cave floor and felt my muscles protest with unfamiliar weakness. This body was young, maybe 16, and felt nothing like the strength I remembered from my previous existence. The cave stretched deeper into shadow ahead of me, while the entrance behind led in a thin stream of dusty light. I stumbled toward the glowing inscriptions on the nearest wall, my fingers tracing characters that seemed to pulse under my touch. The writing described cultivation techniques I recognized from my past life, methods that could turn an ordinary person into something far greater. A sharp pain lanced through my skull as more memories flooded back. I had been a master once, had trained hundreds of students before everything ended. The system screen flickered and expanded, showing me a simple progress bar labeled Disciples Found, 0/3, with a countdown timer ticking away beneath it. My breath came faster as I realized the stakes were already in motion. This wasn't just a second chance at life, but a test with real consequences tied to it. I needed to find people with hidden potential and guide them before this timer reached 0, or I would lose whatever opportunity the system was offering. The glowing inscription suddenly brightened and burned itself into my mind, filling me with knowledge about a nearby town where desperate people gathered. I steadied myself against the wall and felt the weakness in my limbs more acutely now. Whatever power I once commanded was gone, stripped away and locked behind the requirements this system demanded of me. The path to the cave entrance looked steep, but I forced my legs to carry me forward one step at a time. The journey down the rocky hillside took longer than it should have, my body refusing to cooperate with the urgency in my mind. By the time I reached the base, the sun had climbed higher and revealed a dusty path leading toward clustered buildings in the distance. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, ignoring the trembling in my knees that threatened to drop me. The town appeared gradually as I walked, first as smoke rising from chimneys, and then as wooden structures packed tightly together. Voices carried on the wind, sharp and argumentative, mixing with the clatter of carts and the bleating of animals. I passed through a crooked gate where two guards barely glanced at me before returning to their dice game. The marketplace spread before me in chaotic rows of stalls and wandering customers who pushed past each other without apology. A young man with a patched coat stood near a merchant's table, his face twisted in frustration as he pointed at a small pouch of herbs. His voice rose above the general noise as he argued about prices that had apparently tripled since his last visit. 3 silver coins for basic healing grass? You're robbing people blind, the young merchant shouted while slamming his hand on the wooden counter. The vendor simply shrugged and turned away to another customer, dismissing him entirely. I watched the young man's shoulders slump in defeat before his eyes went distant, focusing on something only he could see. His expression shifted from anger to surprise as an invisible interface must have appeared before him too. The system worked on others besides me, offering them tasks and rewards that could change their circumstances if they succeeded. I filed that information away and continued deeper into the market, scanning faces for someone who matched the potential the glowing inscription had promised. Children darted between stalls stealing scraps while adults pretended not to notice their hunger. Beggars lined the alley walls with empty cups and emptier expressions that spoke of long abandonment by fortune. I moved past them all, feeling the system's subtle pull like a compass needle pointing me towards something specific. A commotion near the edge of the communal area drew my attention to a tall tree with spreading branches. A girl clung to the trunk about 10 feet up, stretching toward clusters of small orange fruits that dangled just beyond her reach. Her clothes hung loose and dirty on her thin frame, and her bare feet gripped the bark with practiced desperation. People walked past without offering help or even looking up at her struggle. She lunged for a branch and nearly lost her grip, catching herself at the last second with a gasp that carried down to where I stood. My system screen pulsed with new information, overlaying her form with text that read Hidden Potential. High. Elemental Affinity. Wind. Current state. Malnourished, untrained. I approached the base of the tree and called up to her in a voice that came out rougher than I intended. Those fruits won't fill your stomach for more than an hour. Come down, and I'll offer you something better. The girl froze and twisted to look down at me, her eyes wide and dark with suspicion. Why would you help me? Nobody helps for free, she said while adjusting her grip on the branch above her head. Her accent carried the flat vowels of someone raised in the outer districts where the law barely reached. I could see her calculating whether to climb higher or drop and run from whatever trap she assumed I was setting. Instead of answering, I jumped and caught the lowest branch, pulling myself up despite the weakness in my arms. The movement came from muscle memory rather than current strength, my body remembering techniques, even if it lacked the power to execute them properly. I climbed past her and reached the fruit cluster she had been struggling for, plucking 6 of them before dropping back down beside her. I held out 3 of the orange fruits and met her suspicious stare with steady calm. My name is Yichin. I'm looking for students who want to become stronger than their circumstances allow. You can take these and leave, or you can listen to what I'm offering. The girl's hand shot out and snatched the fruits before I could blink, but she didn't immediately flee. She bit into one of them and chewed, while studying my face for signs of deception. Juice ran down her chin as she swallowed, and finally spoke again through another mouthful. What kind of stronger? Like the cultivators who fly over the rooftops and burn through city gates. Her tone mixed disbelief with a hunger that went deeper than her empty stomach. Exactly that kind, I said while biting into my own fruit and finding it sour but edible. But it requires dedication and pain. The training will break you down before it builds you back up into something greater. Most people aren't willing to pay that price. I watched her face carefully, looking for the spark of determination the system had detected beneath her desperate exterior. She finished all 3 fruits in silence before wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. I'm Ching Li. If you're lying to me, I'll steal everything you own and disappear where you'll never find me. Despite the threat, hope flickered in her expression like a candle flame fighting against wind. I nodded and gestured for her to follow me down from the tree, which she did with nimble movements that confirmed her natural athleticism. We both dropped to the ground near a group of women carrying water jugs who gave us barely a glance. I started walking toward the public square where stone benches ringed a dry fountain, and Ching Li trailed 3 steps behind me. The square offered more space and fewer eavesdroppers than the cramped market alleys. I sat on one of the benches and waited until Ching Li perched on the edge beside me, her posture ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. The system screen appeared again, this time showing me a contract interface that required both our acknowledgments. I need to explain what accepting me as your master means, I said while pulling up the terms that the system wanted formalized. You'll train every day without exception. You'll follow my instructions even when they seem impossible. In exchange, I'll teach you techniques that can elevate you from a street scavenger to someone powerful enough to choose her own fate. The words felt strange coming from my current weak body, but the conviction behind them came from lifetimes of experience. Ching Li's hands twisted in her lap as old wounds seemed to surface in her memory. I tried joining a sect once. They laughed at me and threw me out because I couldn't read their entrance requirements. They said I had no talent worth wasting resources on. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, shame coloring every syllable. I leaned forward and caught her eye with an intensity that made her flinch. They were blind fools who couldn't recognize raw potential when it stood before them. You have an affinity for wind that most cultivators would kill to possess, but it's untrained and buried under years of survival thinking. The system screen confirmed my words with detailed statistics about her latent abilities. How can you possibly know that? Ching Li asked, her suspicious nature reasserting itself against the temptation of hope. She shifted on the bench like she was preparing to run despite her obvious desire to believe me. I could see the war happening behind her eyes between cynicism earned through hard experience and a desperate wish for something better. I raised my hand and channeled the smallest trickle of energy I could manage, feeling it drain my reserves immediately. A faint breeze swirled around my palm for 3 seconds before guttering out like a dying torch. Sweat broke out on my forehead from that tiny demonstration, but it achieved the desired effect as Ching Li's mouth fell open. "I was a master in my previous life," I said while catching my breath. "I've returned to this world with knowledge, but without strength. The system that governs cultivation has given me a task: find disciples and train them to greatness. In doing so, I'll regain what I lost and exceed it." The explanation sounded absurd, even to my ears, but the truth often did. Ching Li stared at my still raised hand where the breeze had manifested moments before. Her expression cycled through disbelief, wonder, calculation, and finally settled on a determination that hardened her young features. She stood up from the bench and bowed deeply in the formal style reserved for master and student relationships. "I accept," she said to the ground before straightening to meet my eyes again. "I don't care if it hurts or if I fail. This is the first real chance anyone has ever offered me, and I won't waste it." The system screen flashed with confirmation as our contract finalized, showing her name under my disciple list with a progress tracker that started at 0%. I felt something shift inside my chest as the bond formed, a connection that ran deeper than words or casual promises. Energy that hadn't been accessible moments before trickled into my reserves like water, finding cracks in stone. The system was rewarding me for completing the first step, giving me back a fraction of strength for each student I successfully recruited. "Then we start immediately," I said while standing despite the exhaustion still weighing down my limbs. "First lesson: a master's responsibility is to see what his students cannot see in themselves. Second lesson: a student's responsibility is to trust that vision until they can stand on their own." I placed my hand on Ching Li's shoulder and felt her tremble slightly under the touch. She nodded and squared her shoulders, lifting her chin in a gesture of defiance against every hardship that had brought her to this moment. "Where do we begin, Master Yichin?" The title sounded strange applied to me in this weakened state, but I accepted it with the same solemnity she offered. "We begin by finding you proper clothes and food," I said while surveying her ragged appearance with a critical eye. "A cultivator's body is their primary tool, and yours has been neglected for too long. Then we'll start the foundation exercises that will unlock your affinity." The system helpfully provided a quest notification about acquiring basic supplies and securing shelter. I guided Ching Li back toward the market district, already planning which stalls might offer fair prices and which ones to avoid. The young merchant from earlier still lingered near the herb vendor, his expression distant as he apparently dealt with his own system interface. I made a mental note to observe him further. Anyone else touched by the system could become either an ally or a complication depending on their goals. Ching Li walked closer to me now, her earlier wariness replaced by cautious optimism that showed in her quicker steps. "Master, how many students are you planning to take?" she asked while dodging around a cart loaded with ceramic pots. The question carried an undertone of insecurity about having to share attention or resources. "2 more," I answered honestly, seeing no benefit in hiding the system's requirement from her. "You're the first, which means you'll have advantages the others won't. More time with me, earlier access to advanced techniques, and the responsibility of helping train whoever comes after you." The idea of turning students into teachers themselves was a cornerstone of my previous methodology. Her eyes widened at the prospect of responsibility so far beyond her current station. "You trust me to teach others when I haven't learned anything yet?" The disbelief in her voice mixed with a hunger to prove herself worthy of that potential trust. I could see her mind already racing ahead to imagine versions of herself capable of guiding others. "Not yet," I admitted while stopping a clothing stall run by an elderly woman with kind eyes. "But you will be ready when the time comes. Trust is something earned through action, and I'll give you every opportunity to earn it." I selected a simple training outfit in dark blue fabric that would allow free movement and haggled the price down to something my nearly empty purse could afford. The vendor wrapped the clothes in brown paper and handed them to Ching Li, who clutched the package like it might vanish if she loosened her grip. "There's a public bathhouse 2 streets over," the elderly woman said while counting the coins I'd paid. "Tell them Grandmother Wei sent you, and they'll let you use the facilities for half price." Her gesture of kindness surprised me until I noticed the way she looked at Ching Li with recognition. Another street child she'd probably watched grow up in poverty. We thanked her and headed toward the bathhouse, passing through narrow alleys where laundry hung between buildings and created a canopy of drying fabric. The system provided another notification about a nearby disturbance that could lead to finding my second disciple, but I dismissed it for now. Ching Li needed immediate attention before I could divide my focus further. The bathhouse appeared as a low wooden building with steam rising from vents in the roof. Inside, a tired-looking attendant accepted our reduced payment without question after I mentioned Grandmother Wei's name. She directed Ching Li toward the women's section and gave me a wooden token for the men's facilities before shuffling away. I waited in the entrance area while Ching Li disappeared to clean herself properly for probably the first time in months. The wooden bench creaked under my weight as I sat and finally allowed myself to feel the full extent of this body's exhaustion. My hands trembled slightly when I held them up, reminding me how far I'd fallen from my previous peak. The system screen appeared unbidden and showed my current statistics in harsh detail. Strength, speed, and cultivation level all registered in the lowest possible tier, with most abilities locked behind requirements I hadn't yet met. Only my knowledge remained intact, a library of techniques and methods trapped inside a vessel too weak to execute them properly. "This is the price of returning," I muttered to the empty room while studying the progress bars that tracked my path back to power. Each disciple I successfully trained would unlock portions of my former strength, while also creating protectors for whatever storm the system implied was coming. The countdown timer from the cave still ticked away in the corner of my vision, showing I had 47 days to find and secure all 3 students. Ching Li emerged 20 minutes later, looking like a different person entirely. The layers of dirt that had obscured her features were gone, revealing a face that would be striking once proper nutrition filled out her hollow cheeks. Her wet hair hung straight to her shoulders, black as ink and still dripping onto the training outfit she now wore. She moved with self-consciousness about being clean and properly dressed, like she'd stolen someone else's appearance. "Better," I said while standing and gesturing toward the exit. "Now we find food, and then locate somewhere to begin your actual training. The system is already providing locations that might serve our purposes." I pulled up the map interface that showed several abandoned buildings on the town's eastern edge where we could work without drawing unwanted attention. We stopped at a food cart where a man sold meat skewers and rice bowls to workers finishing their shifts. I bought 2 portions of each and watched Ching Li force herself to eat slowly despite obvious desire to devour everything immediately. The discipline was already there underneath her circumstances, waiting for direction and purpose to give it shape. "Tell me about your life before today," I said while eating my own portion and studying her reactions. "I need to understand what experiences shaped you, so I can determine which training methods will work best. Don't hide anything. There's no shame in survival, only in refusing to grow beyond it." The request clearly made her uncomfortable, but she swallowed her current bite and began speaking. "I trained harder than I ever had before, pushing my body until sweat dripped from my chin and stained the wooden floor beneath me." Ching Li sat cross-legged beside me, her eyes closed as she absorbed the breathing techniques I had shown her earlier. The training hall stretched around us with its high ceiling and rows of practice dummies lining the walls. Ancient texts lay open on a low table between us, their yellowed pages covered in cultivation methods passed down through generations. I could feel the energy building in my core as I repeated the movements, each cycle stronger than the last. The doubt crept in like a shadow, whispering that transforming both of us in such a short time was impossible. Qing Li's breath hitched as she struggled to maintain her focus, her small hands trembling slightly on her knees. I adjusted my position and placed my hand on her shoulder, guiding a thread of my own energy into her body. The connection formed instantly, and I felt the blockages in her meridians like stones in a stream. My vision blurred at the edges as I pushed more power through the link, forcing open the pathways that had remained dormant in her since birth. The strain made my muscles ache, but I refused to stop until her breathing steadied and her face relaxed. We continued like this for hours, the sunlight through the windows shifting from gold to orange as the day wore on. A sudden surge of energy erupted from deep within my core, tearing through my body like lightning through a clear sky. I gasped and pulled my hand back from Qing Li's shoulder as the power flooded every part of me. The wooden floor beneath me cracked in a web of fractures, and the practice dummies along the walls toppled over from the pressure. My hands glowed with a pale blue light that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Qing Li's eyes flew open, wide with shock as she scrambled backward on the floor. The transformation felt like being reborn, every cell in my body rewriting itself into something stronger and more refined. "Master, what's happening to you?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but I heard the fear in it. I took a deep breath and forced the energy to settle, pulling it back into my core where it coiled like a sleeping dragon. The glow faded from my hands as I stood up, my legs steadier than they had been in years. I reached down and helped Qing Li to her feet, noticing how light she felt now that my strength had increased. The training hall looked smaller somehow, as if my perception had expanded beyond the physical space. I knew we had made progress, but there was still so much further to go. The next morning, I brought Qing Li to the cloth market that sprawled across the lower district of the sect's outer grounds. Colorful fabrics hung from wooden frames, creating a maze of silk and cotton that fluttered in the morning breeze. Merchants called out their prices as disciples and outer sect members browsed through the stalls. I guided Qing Li by the elbow, watching her eyes widen at the array of choices before us. Her old robe was still stained and torn at the hem, a reminder of where she had come from. I picked up a bolt of blue fabric that shimmered like water under sunlight, holding it up to her face to check the color. Qing Li reached out to touch the silk, then pulled her hand back as if afraid she might damage it. Her fingers were still dirty from this morning's training, the nails chipped and uneven. I purchased the fabric along with several others in greens and soft yellows, stacking them in her arms until she could barely see over the pile. The merchant smiled and wrapped them in paper, tying the bundle with rough twine. Qing Li clutched the package to her chest, her expression caught between joy and uncertainty. I could see the worry in the way she kept glancing down at the fabrics, as if they might disappear. "What if I ruin them?" she asked, her voice so quiet I almost missed it over the market noise. I shook my head and paid for matching shoes and hair ornaments at the next stall, adding them to her growing collection. The market pulsed with life around us, but I kept my attention on her, watching for any sign that she might bolt. A tailor's shop stood at the end of the row, its entrance marked by a wooden sign shaped like a needle. I led Qing Li inside, where an elderly woman greeted us with a measuring tape already in hand. The shop smelled of fresh linen and the sweet incense the tailor burned to keep moths away. The dressing area was separated from the main shop by a thick curtain embroidered with flowering vines. I waited outside while the tailor took Qing Li's measurements, hearing the soft murmur of their voices through the fabric. Other customers browsed the ready-made robes hanging on the walls, but I paid them no attention. My mind was already moving ahead to the next steps in her training, the techniques she would need to master. The curtain rustled and I straightened, preparing to offer encouragement. Qing Li stepped out wearing a robe of deep blue that brought out the color in her eyes. The fabric fit her properly for the first time, the sleeves the right length and the hem falling just above her new shoes. Her hair had been pulled back with one of the ornaments, a simple pin carved from jade. She stood frozen in place, her hands clutching the sides of her robe as if she might fall without holding on. The transformation was remarkable, turning the dirty beggar girl into someone who could stand among the sect's disciples. Yet I could see the doubt still lingering in the way she refused to meet my eyes. "You look like you belong here now," I said, keeping my voice firm but gentle. Her head snapped up at my words, and I saw the beginning of something new in her expression. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a tiny flame of belief that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than what she had been. I paid the tailor and led Ching Li back out into the market, letting her adjust to the feeling of clean clothes and proper shoes. The other shoppers gave us respectful nods as we passed, recognizing the sex colors in her new robe. She walked taller with each step, though her hands still trembled slightly at her sides. We returned to the sect proper as the afternoon sun beat down on the stone pathways. I took a different route this time, leading Ching Li through the communal gardens where disciples gathered to rest between training sessions. Fruit trees lined the paths, their branches heavy with early spring blossoms. A small pond reflected the sky, with stone benches arranged around its edge. Several disciples practiced sword forms in an open area, their movements synchronized and graceful. Ching Li slowed her pace, watching them with an expression I recognized from my own past life. "This is our home now," I told her, gesturing to the buildings and training grounds spread out before us. "Every person here was once where you are now." She turned to look at me, her eyes searching my face for any hint of deception. The new robe rustled as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. I could feel her uncertainty like a physical weight in the air between us. The sect had given me a second chance when I arrived in this world, and now I was offering her the same opportunity. The question was whether she could accept it and everything it meant. A group of younger disciples ran past us, laughing as they chased each other toward the dining hall. Ching Li's shoulders sagged slightly as she watched them disappear around a corner. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. I placed my hand on her shoulder, the same gesture I had used during her training. "You've already survived things these disciples have never faced," I said, letting my conviction flow through my words. "That strength doesn't disappear just because you're wearing clean clothes now. It becomes your foundation." Her jaw tightened and she straightened her spine, pulling herself up to her full height. The doubt was still there in her eyes, but something else was growing alongside it. I recognized it as the same determination that had driven me to master techniques far above my initial level. The sect bells rang out across the grounds, signaling the evening meal. Ching Li looked toward the dining hall, then back at me with a question on her face. I nodded, and we started walking together, her steps becoming more confident with each passing moment. I stood at the center of the training hall, with Ching Li across from me, watching the way her shoulders curved inward like she wanted to disappear. The polished wooden floor reflected the late afternoon light streaming through the high windows, casting long shadows between us. She clutched her hands together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Your stance is wrong because you don't believe you deserve to stand," I said, keeping my voice level and firm. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine for just a second before dropping back to the floor. The training hall felt too large around us, empty except for the practice dummies lined against the far wall and the faint smell of incense from the morning meditation sessions. I stepped closer and adjusted her feet with light taps from my own, positioning her into the opening form of the flowing river technique. "Breathe in through your core, not your chest," I instructed, placing one hand on her shoulder blade to show her where tension had locked her muscles tight. Her whole body trembled under my palm like a leaf barely hanging onto its branch. I could feel every doubt she carried pressing down on her spirit, making her movements stiff and graceless. She tried to follow my guidance, drawing in a breath that stuttered halfway through. The energy around her flickered weakly, barely visible as a faint shimmer in the air. I had seen this before in my past life, students so wounded by failure that they sabotaged themselves before they could even begin. The difference was that Ching Li had potential buried deep beneath all that fear, potential that could rival disciples twice her age if only she would reach for it. Again, I said, stepping back to give her space to attempt the first circulation pattern. She closed her eyes and tried once more, her hands moving through the prescribed gestures while her breathing remained shallow and uncertain. The energy she managed to gather dispersed before completing even half the cycle, scattering like smoke in wind. Frustration crossed her face, deepening the lines around her mouth. I moved beside her and demonstrated the pattern myself, letting my own energy flow visibly so she could see how it should move. The cultivation technique I had learned demanded perfect control, each breath synchronized with the movement of internal energy through specific channels. When executed correctly, it created a loop that amplified power with each rotation, but any break in concentration caused the entire structure to collapse. My demonstration lit up the air around my hands with a soft blue glow that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Watch how the energy follows intention, not force, I explained, slowing the movements so she could track every detail. Your past failures mean nothing here. Only this moment exists. Qing Li opened her eyes and watched with an intensity that made something in my chest tighten. She was trying so hard, fighting against years of being told she would never amount to anything. The system had marked her as someone worth saving, someone whose growth would ripple outward in ways I could not yet predict. I had to believe that judgment was sound. We repeated the exercise 17 times before she managed to complete a full circulation without the energy scattering. By then, sweat had soaked through the back of her training robe and her legs shook with exhaustion. But that single successful loop had lit a spark in her eyes that had not been there before.